Dave Corinth here. Welcome to my shop. About a month and a half ago, Michael Jinks sent me these three pieces of wood and asked me to make him a set of totes and knobs for a number 3 all the way up to a number 8, including the fractional sizes. For a Sweetheart era plane, types 12, 13. Now this is a type 15, meaning that the front knob has a little bitty dimple up there for the raised ring. We're not going to put that on these. And this isn't just any old wood. This is rosewood. Now I put it like this on purpose so it would look kind of dull and gray and nasty, but if you can see what I've planed, it's rosewood and it is absolutely gorgeous. Straight grained, beautiful color, and we're going to make lots of totes and knobs out of this stuff. So let's get started. Now at first glance when you see this, it looks horrible. If you saw that in a pile of wood, you wouldn't give it a second chance. It looks awful. Gray, dingy. It's got some white marks. I don't know, bird poop or something down here maybe. I don't know what it is, but it's nasty. And then on this side, there's evidence that it was hewn. There's an axe mark there, and some more down here. So this side was hewn. This side was cut with a bandsaw, and this side was cut with a bandsaw. And of course, Michael, before he sent it to me, he had it resawn, and you can see there's what's underneath. Beautiful rosewood, absolutely gorgeous. Straight grained, but lots of color variation. It's darker and more chocolatey up here, and then it gets kind of a mocha color down at the bottom. So it's going to make great knobs. The piece is split. You can see right there, but I have plenty of meat here and plenty of meat here to make totes or make knobs for. The slabs for the totes, same thing, lots of color variation, darker on the bottom, more of a chocolatey brown, and then more of a mocha up here. So we're going to try to make sure we get that blend in each tote. And the same thing on the other piece, it is nearly identical. It has darker up here and lighter down here. Beautiful stuff. And of course, the best wood to make totes and knobs from, if you can get it. So a little bit about the history of this particular piece of rosewood, or pieces of rosewood. Michael Jinks tells me that this was bought by a friend of his in Norfolk, Virginia at the Naval Shipyard there in the 1980s. Don't know the circumstances, I just know that's where it was bought. I'd love to have more of a story and be able to tell you a cool one, but I don't have one. I'm not going to make one up. So we'll just say that it was bought at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in the 1980s. So we're going to be very mindful when we cut this. We're not going to be making wasteful cuts. And then when we're done, we're going to ship it back to Mr. Jinks, all the scraps, and then he can do with them as he pleases. I traced these out using the template that I used to route them with. And I'm not worried about getting it exact because the template will take care of it when I put it on that router bit. And both of these boards have been planed down to 0.95 inches thick. A little over 15/16. When I cut these out, I'm not trying to be exactly on that line. If anything, I'm leaving a little bit of the line there. What I don't want to do is take too much off. Like I said, the template will make sure that it cuts it out perfect for me, so I don't have to be exact when I'm cutting these out. And anytime I'm cutting with rosewood, sanding, shaping, anything, if there's dust going to be made, I wear gloves. I haven't yet picked up an allergy for this stuff, but I have noticed that it will irritate my hands if I get too much dust on them. So far so good, but I don't want to take a chance. So I have all of the totes cut out. I, of course, cut one extra of each just in case I screw one of them up, I've got a backup. But this is the stack of the number 3/4s right here, and the 5 1/4. And then I have 7 of the number 4 1/2 all the way up to 8. So before I can do anything else, I have to attach this little device onto each one of these and then go shape them out. So I want to talk about this first. This is something I came up with. I'm sure other people have done it too, but all this is a piece of Baltic birch. It's 5/16 of an inch thick, and it is cut from an original Stanley number 3 or 4 Sweetheart era tote. And it was one that was flawless, didn't have any repairs, nothing. And I keep an extra that does have flaws, like this one. You can see this one is missing its horn, but from this one I can get crucial measurements. For instance, from the tip to the center of the hole, and from the back to the center of the hole, and from the back to where this hole gets drilled, and of course for the little nib up here. So these having an original is always a good idea to keep around. This one's in pretty rough shape. It could be repaired, but it's also not going to hurt anything staying here that I use as a template to make others. I also have one for the number 5, and you can see this is the number 5. It will fit a type 9 all the way up to type 19, but the type 19 won't quite look the same. So the type 19s are a little fatter. So basically this is a type 9 up to type 16. And this came off of a type 12. It is very rough. It's missing the horn. It has check marks everywhere. You can see one there. You can see one there. There's another one here and a couple right there. It is littered with them. So this one would not be any good to try to fix, but I can get all of my key numbers, which is, of course, from the tip to the center, from the back to the center, and of course I can find the front tote screw hole right here. And I measure that from the back as well to the center of that. And I also get this little dip profile, because whenever I mill these out to begin with on this, you can see this doesn't have that. It's smooth. But whenever I go to make it finally, I have to cut that out. And of course I have 2 other ones. This is the one for the 5, and this is the one for the 4. And this gives me all these numbers that I don't want to forget in locations of things. And then once I get these all cut out, I'll then use this to trace them out finally. So next thing I want to do is I want to attach this to all these one at a time, and then go over to the router bit, which is over there. You're going to have to take my word. That's where it's at. And then we'll get these things cut out. So first I want to talk a little bit about this router bit. This router bit comes from Lee Valley, and it's an adjustable double round over. So it rounds over both sides at the same time. And it's adjustable. So if I want to widen the profile, all I have to do is loosen this nut, remove some of these washers, and place them in between the 2 bits. And then replace the nut, and it will widen this profile. It has this guide bearing on top, and it will follow whatever profile you make on your template. And it is a wonderful router bit. I don't know the number of it off the top of my head, but I will post it on the video. If you're wanting to buy one, these are fantastic. I think they're about $75, but they're worth every penny of it if you're going to make saw handles or totes. These are wonderful. And if you'll notice, I have this long rod attached to the template. And that's to keep my fingers from getting anywhere near that giant spinning router bit. That thing would be a great finger chewer upper, and I don't want my fingers anywhere near that thing. So I've got all of them routed, and of course I did wear gloves because I don't want rosewood dust on my hands. And these are the last 2 I just did, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the screws from them, and then we'll go on to the next step. So now that I have all of the totes profiled, you can see that profile is very close, if not identical to the originals. And that is what we're after. And it's not perfect yet. We still got a lot of sanding and smoothing to do. It leaves this little raised section, but we're going to round that and profile it. So that's not going to be an issue. So earlier I told you I had these little secondary templates. And all I'm going to do is place one on top like so. Line it up where it should go. Take a pencil, mark the bottom, mark the top, and then take it over to the bandsaw and cut this out and cut the bottom off. And the number 5 size totes get the same treatment. All I have to do is line it up and then transfer the bottom mark and the top mark. And now that one is ready to cut out. And I'm making sure to leave the pencil line when I cut these, because I'll make it exact on my disc sander. Right now I'm just trying to get 99% of it cut. And here I'm sanding them down to that pencil line disappears. So I have the basic shape of the totes done, and all I have left to do is to shape the horn and then round over the toe on the heel of the totes. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and drill all the main holes, and I want to show you where those holes go on these two. I put some green tape on this so we could see it a lot easier. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a 7/16 hole in the top using a 7/16 Forstner bit. It'll go down a 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to take a 5/16 brad point drill bit, drill halfway through. Then we'll flip it over, and then we'll finish the job from the bottom. This is how Stanley did it. And if you're asking me how I know Stanley did it this way, because I've seen many totes that have evidence of it. This is one that I cut in half. And you can see where they got down this far, and then they finished it from the bottom, or they started at the bottom and then finished at the top. I don't know which one they did. I start from the top and then finish at the bottom. But that is clearly, and though that's not a different size hole, that's because it got off. That's because it was going in here and it was leaning that direction. They stopped, not because they thought it was leaning, they just stopped. And they came in and finished it from the top. I have another one here. This one is off of a number 5.5 type 8, I believe. And I've had this one for a long time. It's one that I use for a pattern to make all of the earlier type 6 through 9 number 5 totes. Beautiful tote, but I keep it because of this. This you can see, when they drilled it from the top, it was off so much, that's where the drill bit was at. And then when they drilled it from the bottom to finish it, it was there. And that is a good, strong 1/8 of an inch to almost a quarter. You can see it in here. This is oblonged. So if I put the dowel in here, they started it like that, and then when they finished it, it was like that. So this is evidence that Stanley clearly drilled from the top and from the bottom. And I find it to be the most efficient way to do it, as long as you have something that will ensure that when you flip it upside down, it stays at the same angle. And the item that I use to do that with is my tote making jig. This is simply 2 boards held together with carriage bolts, and in the middle is a wedge. And each wedge has a different angle. This one is 26, which will do the 3, 4, and 5 1/4. This one is 27, which will do the number 5 size totes. So all you do is place a tote in the jig, making sure that the heel of the tote is making full contact with that wedge, and then you tighten it down. And that allows you to drill the hole at a 90-degree angle, straight down. And I don't have to worry about tilting the table on my drill press. And then when I flip it over, it will drill the bottom hole at a 90-degree angle. And it'll be in the exact same location as the hole you drilled from the top. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to drill the number 3, 4 holes, because they have this 9/16 hole drilled at the bottom that goes at a 90-degree angle to the heel. It goes down a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to use this Forstner bit to do it, straight down. It doesn't have to be put into this jig to do it. I can just set it on my vise and then drill straight down. And then once I have the bore holes drilled, the angle hole drilled, and the top and bottom holes, then I'll drill this little 9/32 hole, which is for the raised nib on the casting to keep the number 3, 4s from rocking. And then on the number 5s, they have the hole in the front, which I drill at 5/16. I'm pretty sure from the factory they were 9/32. But this gives you just a little bit more room to wiggle it around in case you just get it off a bit. And once that's drilled, then we'll shape the little dimple on the front of the toe. So let's get to drilling some holes. First, I'm going to drill the hole for the raised boss on the number 3, 4, and 5 1/4 size totes. And then I'm going to go ahead while I've got it there and drill for that little nib. Then with the tote in the jig, I can go ahead and drill the 7/16 hole for the barrel nut. And then drill down from the top the 5/16 hole for the rod. Once that jig's flipped over, I can go ahead and finish the 5/16 hole for the rod. Same procedure for the number 5 size totes, but I don't have to drill that hole for the raised boss at the bottom of the plane since it doesn't have one. For the 5 through number 8 totes, I take them out of the jig to drill this hole for that small screw on the toe. And I drill this hole slowly, making sure that I don't tear out when I come through the bottom. So this is the result of drilling that hole from the bottom down. It's impossible to drill it this way. The top of the tote gets in the way, unless you had a really small drill bit and some kind of weird little, I don't know. But this is the easiest way to do it, is from the bottom. And of course, use a brad point drill bit. You can see the leading edge here, it actually cuts in front so that when it comes out the bottom, it doesn't chip it. If you use one of these, it'll just push on that wood when you get to the bottom, and it can create a big chip here which can't be removed. If you look at an older tote, this is an original Stanley, it has a little flat spot here. Stanley did this, I think Miller's Falls did it. Sargent didn't, Union didn't. I don't know about Ohio, I'd have to check that, but they have this little flat spot, and I wait until after I drill this hole and then I profile it to put that flat spot on. So next we'll go ahead and we'll profile the nose or the toe on the bottom and get the horn profiled. I use a 4-inch by 36-inch belt sander to shape the horns, and I use 80 grit sandpaper. I used to use 120, but I found that it would burn the sandpaper a lot easier. I'm not too concerned about the finish because I'm going to sand it down better after this is done. Right now I'm just trying to get 95% of the shape. And shaping the toe, I use the same belt sander, 80 grit sandpaper, and just rounding it over. On the number 3 and 4 size totes, the base of the tote is actually kind of oval shaped. The sides are not parallel, and on the number 5, it actually tapers down towards the toe. And here I'm trying to make sure that I don't make the sides perfectly parallel. And on the number 5 size totes, I have to make that flat spot on the toe. And to do that, I just use a disc sander and slowly take it off. This is the fastest way I found to do it and the most accurate. Okay, now that I've got all of the totes made, the holes drilled, their shapes 90% done, I don't want to sand them yet because I want to sand the totes the same time I sand the knobs. So we're going to make knobs for a while. And there's 3 basic sizes here. This is for the 6 through number 8, a little taller, number 5, and number 3 and 4. And we're going to make them out of this. This is a giant piece of rosewood, very heavy. It does have a split, like I mentioned earlier, right down the middle. But there's enough meat on this side and enough meat on that side to get plenty of knobs for all those totes. So let's turn some knobs. Stanley made several different design changes over the years when they started making planes. And of course, the earliest ones look similar to this. This is off of Type 4, number 5. And they have a beaded base or a ring around the bottom. The top's considerably fatter than the later ones and very graceful looking shape. Beautiful by all means. That is a gorgeous knob. This was on the Type 1 through 6 or 5, I believe. So some of the 6s have rings, but mostly Type 5. Starting in Type 6, you get this shape, which is not quite as pronounced at the bottom, and the bead is eliminated. And then this goes from Type 6 all the way up to Type 11. And then Stanley made the tall knob, which they introduced on the bedrocks first. Apparently people liked them. They put them on the Bailey-style bench planes. But there's one major flaw. They don't have a raised ring around the bottom like the bedrocks do. And they are notorious for doing that, which is splitting on the bottom. So Type 12 and 13s, the knobs, a lot of the knobs will have these checks or cracks at the bottom. And Stanley fixed this. Starting on the Type 14s, they put a raised ring at the bottom, and the knob then sits inside that raised ring, encapsulates the bottom of the base, and prevents the knob from cracking. So we're going to make this design, which is the Type 12 and 13 Sweetheart era. These are the ones that people generally want because most of them are cracked. And of course, since the customer wants that, that's what we're going to make. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make a tall one, which is 6 through 8. Medium-sized one, which would be the 5 and I believe the 4.5. And then the small one, which would be the 3, 5 1/4, and 4. So all of them will have this flat base. They won't have that little indent for the raised ring. This one came off of a Type 17, I believe, or 18. And it does have that, but all we have to do is when we make the new one is not put that on there. So it's pretty simple to do. These are the ones that I use to make all of my Type 12 and 13 knobs with. And there's 3 sizes: big, medium, small. So first thing I got to do is cut that rosewood up so that we can turn it into some knobs. So I just got done cutting all the blanks to turn these knobs. And you can see here's one here. Of course, I used my Diston number 7 20-inch panel saw to do all this work. Cross-cutting and ripping, easy. Even though I have a table saw about 6 feet that direction that could have cut these up in 5 minutes, I decided to take a couple hours and use my handsaw in rosewood nonetheless, which is pretty hard wood. But I mean, I want to keep it old school. I wouldn't dream of just taking him over there to the table saw and cutting him up in 5 minutes. That'd be too easy. I don't want to do that. That's insane. Plus, Roy Underhill would be gravely disappointed if he thought that I cut these on my table saw. So, anyways, I have 4 blanks because I have an extra number 4 size tote, 3/4 size tote, and I have 4 blanks for that. That's the 3, 4, and 5 1/4. I have 3 blanks for the number 5 size, which will do the number 5 and the 4.5, but I have an extra one because I have an extra tote, and I think the number 5 size would be a good extra. And then I have 4 of the larger ones, which would be the 5.5, 6, 7, and 8. So I'm going to put these on the lathe, and I'm going to turn one of each so you can see the process used to turn each size of these knobs. So I want to go ahead and show you the tools that I'm going to use. First, I'm going to use this large gouge to get the basic diameter of each knob. And then I'll use this smaller one to get the waist profile made. And then I use a skew, 30-degree angle, that I get the top of the knob with. And then I have a parting tool, of course, to cut it off. And then I have a couple of custom ones that I've made. This is just basically a scraper. It's an old Craftsman chisel that I picked up years ago, and I've converted it into a scraper. This does the waist at the very end. It leaves a very smooth finish. And then, of course, I have a smaller parting tool, which is nothing more than a very thin 1/8 inch chisel. And I use this in case I need to get into some tight place to cut it off at the very, very end. So these are the tools I use. Of course, I'm wearing gloves because you don't want to get that rosewood dust in the cracks of your hands because it will mess you up. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the number 3 and 4 size knobs. And the first thing I want to do is establish the diameter. And on those 3s and 4s, it's a hair over 1 inch and 9/16, but not quite 1 inch and 5/8. And once I'm happy with that, I want to establish the height, which is 2.5 inches. And I'm going to cut that with the parting tool. When I'm turning these knobs, there's 3 points I'm looking for, and that is the top of the base, this area right here, the lowest point of the waist, which is right here, and the apex of the ball, which would be the very tip top right along this line right here. And you'll continually see me relocate those points. Once I have those marks on there, I'll start at the waist. And I'm trying to take the waist down a little bit shallower than the actual diameter of the base, which is a little bit more than 1 inch and 1/8 at 1 inch and 5/32. And here I'm reestablishing those 3 points. And then I'll work on the waist some more. I'm not trying to take the waist all the way down. I'm just getting it close. Then I'll start working on that ball. And to do this, I use my skew. I found this to be the most effective tool to do that. And I'm leaving that waist on the top of the ball a little less than 7/16, about the diameter of a barrel nut, because it's going to get removed with the Forstner bit once I get this knob turned. Once I have a majority of the ball turned on top, then I'll start to work on that waist some more. And the narrowest point on that waist is a little bit less than 7/8 of an inch thick. Now obviously a knob is usually viewed in the upright position, not in the horizontal position like it is on this lathe. So I frequently take the original knob and set it next to the one on the lathe just to check the profile to make sure it looks right, because it can be deceiving. Now I take those gloves off when I sand because I want to feel the wood, but I do have my shop vac set up right behind it to suck all that dust in. For the number 5 size totes, I'm actually taking the diameter down to 1 11/16 and establishing a height of 2 5/8. So a little bit bigger. Again, marking those 3 points, taking the waist out first, and establishing that base at 1 7/32, or just a little bit less than 1 1/4 inches. The waist on the number 5 size is exactly 7/8, a hair thicker than the 3 and 4 size. And I have found turning these tall knobs to be a little bit easier than turning the low. The top of a tall knob is basically just a ball, and then you have the base, and then it's connected by an hourglass waist. So they're pretty simple. For the number 6 through 8, the diameter is a hair over 1.75 inches, so they're substantially bigger than the other two. And the height is 2 3/4 inches. In the diameter, the base comes in at 1 9/30 inches. And the diameter of the waist is a hair over 7/8 of an inch, so a little bit bigger than the other two. Once I have the knobs turned, then I have to start drilling some holes. And the first hole I drill is the one for the barrel nut, 1/2 inch down, with a 7/16 Forstner bit, and I have to do this 11 times for this job. You can see there's a 7/16 dowel in the base of this vise, and all I do is place the knob on it and ensure that that Forstner bit is centered over the center of that dowel. So when I drill this hole at the bottom, it lines it up perfectly with the hole on the top. And I do the same thing for drilling the hole for the rod. I line it up over that dowel and drill the hole for the rod 5/16 all the way through. And this ensures that it stays centered. So next I want to sand these. And I want to remove this flat spot and turn this into a continuous curve or a radius. And I went ahead and took this one and took a file and removed what I'm going to try to remove when I sand them. And you can see this is actually a radius. It doesn't have a flat spot when it's finished. It curves over nice and gentle. And that's the look we're after when we sand these totes. So let's get to sanding. I bought this 1-inch sleeveless sanding drum off of Lee Valley about 2 years ago, and I absolutely love it. These are fantastic, but the key to it is you want to use good quality sandpaper. Don't buy sandpaper from that place that rhymes with Barber Straight. You want to buy good quality sandpaper, and I buy 3M 220 grit. But if you buy cheap sandpaper, it's more likely that it's going to rip while you're sanding, and then you're going to have to replace it, and it's just going to waste time. So buy good sandpaper. And I put the stamp on the bottom of the tote so you can't see it when the tote's in place. Now the sanding drum doesn't quite get it smooth enough, so I'm going to go over all these totes with 320 grit since the rosewood and do it by hand, going with the grain whenever possible. And then I'll buff that out with some 4/0 steel wool. To start sanding the knobs, I take a piece of Scotch-Brite and put a piece of 320 grit sandpaper on it. And this kind of polishes the top of it off where I cut it off on the lathe, in case it was a little bit wider than where I drilled for the barrel nut. And then I'll polish each one of these with 4/0 steel wool, just like I did the totes. I finish all the totes and knobs that I make with spray lacquer, and I have found for some reason, and maybe you guys can tell me why, but I get better results and they look more like the original when I use satin or matte finish lacquer versus a high gloss. Once I polish them with steel wool, for some reason, if I use high gloss, they just don't look right. But if I use satin or matte, they come out looking just like the originals. For rosewood, I've found 3 light coats is more than enough. The first coat is going to soak up quite a bit of that finish. So it's real tempting to want to overspray that first coat. But you just got to remember, apply 3 light coats. And since lacquer dries fast, it only takes about 20 or 30 minutes between coats. And I've said this before, I'm not a big fan of an oil finish on these rosewood totes. It's not what Stanley used, and I kind of like these to look like the originals. And I found that using boiled linseed oil or tung oil really darkens the rosewood, whereas the lacquer doesn't darken it up as much. So these have dried for about 16 hours, and they look absolutely fantastic. That color is gorgeous. I'm very happy with the way these have turned out. So now I've got to buff them and polish them, and then we'll test fit them, and these will be done. So how I buff these is I use 4/0 steel wool. All I do is lightly go over the surface with the grain when possible. So there's the tote, and now we'll do a knob. And so there's a knob done. So next thing I want to do is take a nice clean cotton rag and then just lightly buff them. I'm not trying to make these things shiny brand new, even though they are. I kind of want them to have a little bit of sheen to them. Now the more you buff them, of course, the shinier they'll get. So if you want them shiny, you can make them shiny. But that right there is the look that we're after. So this is the rod that I use to test all the totes. And if you can see, it does not fit in there. This is 7/16 and this is 7/16, but it's just too tight. So I have to take a reamer and ream that out to 29/64. And I use this to do that. Perfect fit. Sometimes they don't fit perfect when you ream it, so you can go back and use that reamer to drill it a little bit deeper until you get the perfect fit. When I attach a tote to a plane, I always start with the small toe screw on the front, and I don't tighten it all the way down. I leave it loose. Then I'll put the barrel nut and rod in, tighten that down, and then tighten the front toe screw. When testing a number 3/4 size totes, when I first put it on, you can see it doesn't go all the way down. And there's a reason for that. When Stanley would cast planes, they would always put what's called a fillet around anything that protruded out of the casting. This fillet eliminates the 90-degree corner right here and prevents sand from sticking to the mold when casting. So you have to incorporate that into the tote. To do that, all I take is this little reamer and ream the bottom of those holes. Like so. Same thing on the front nib. Like that. Now it should fit right on there. Then you can take the barrel nut and rod, slide it into the hole, tighten it down, And now we have a tote that fits our plane. And when testing the knobs, you got to remember to countersink the bottom of the knob as well. Although generally it doesn't get in the way, but I still like to do it. Knobs are pretty simple, straightforward. Put it on the plane, put the screw in, tighten it down, make sure it fits. And now we have a knob that doesn't have all those cracks at the base. Our totes and knobs are all done in beautiful rosewood numbers 3 through 8, including the fractional sizes with 2 extra to spare. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll make more. I'll just try to make them shorter next time. Thank you for watching.